Hello and welcome again to the last of our 4 seminars on MEDITA Mundi and the subject of meditation. And for those of you who've been following the last talks, today is the finale with the awakening of consciousness. It's the objective of meditation, and it's something that we've been, in a way, building up to. So welcome everyone. If anyone's new, well, it doesn't make any difference that you haven't seen the previous talks. What we're going to talk about today is self-explanatory. So let's go straight into the subject matter. I'll share the presentation. You should all see it now. Should be coming up. Excellent. And we'll just get it onto the slide screen. Here we go. So I hope you can all see that now. I'm just going to ask my technician actually what's going on because I can't see it properly. Okay, we can see it here. And sorry about this because okay, now we should see the whole thing. So, well, let's talk about the awakening of consciousness. But to talk about the awakening of consciousness, we have to ask ourselves, well, what is consciousness in the first place? And the invitation after this lecture is to invite all of you, if you have not done so until now, to join the free online courses or the free courses in physical form in a classroom, if you live near a Gnostic center or somewhere where people are teaching this, and go through the free course with no commitments. You don't have to join anything or anything afterwards, as wisdom is something that in our understanding you don't buy or sell. It's not a commercial issue. True knowledge can't be bought and can't be sold, which is why if you are interested in having it and obtaining it in the true sense, then it brings great joy to share it with others. So there's no money involved in any of this. So yeah, feel free to join through the links here, and we'll show them through at the end again if you feel inspired to begin investigating and find out more tools, basically to acquire tools and information for working on ourselves. So let's have a look at the big questions. I mean, this is where we've got to start, really. We're not wandering about in superficiality. We need to ask ourselves serious questions about existence, about what is life? What is consciousness? Where do we come from? What is the meaning of life? And here we have to make a shortcut. We are not going to waste time on intellectual debates about whether spirituality exists, consciousness exists, whether this atheistic materialist vision of evolution, where everything is just chance and atoms running around where nobody knows where they came from either. All these ridiculous theories, we're not going to deal with them at all. We have to presuppose that a right-minded person with a feeling for mystery and meaning has already understood that there is something more to life than just being a product of billions of years of senseless processes. So we are presupposing from the start that life does have meaning, and therefore human life has meaning, and that therefore we find ourselves in a body, and that we have a job to do. We have to find out what is the meaning of our life. And again, this is a personal quest that every human being who has the gift of, or the opportunity of finding themselves consciously inside a body with the 5 senses to connect with the outside world, then there is a lot that can be done. And that's what this lecture is all about. That's what this talk is leading up to invite us to enter into this extraordinary world of the unknown, but the unknown within us. We mentioned in the earlier talks this quest, in the Star Trek-like quest into space, the final frontier, in all these theories about, well, what is the meaning of a black hole? What is the meaning of dark matter? And all this is not the subject of our investigations, for the simple reason that the only real tools that can be used to understand the nature of anything behind matter are inside of us. So the microscope and the telescope are actually inner faculties that every human being has latently inside of themselves. So it's actually only through going inside that we will understand the meaning and true significance of what's outside. And this, of course, is why when we look at history and archaeology, the further back we go in time, the greater are the monuments and the more mysterious are the processes that today mystify modern archaeologists as much as they mystify modern scientists. It's fascinating to see, for example, the greatest of engineers and architects of our time looking at how the ancient Egyptians could have perfectly carved in solid granite laser accurate hieroglyphs and sarcophagi. And all the experts come along today and say, well, we don't know how to do it. We can't do it. It's not possible. We don't have the machinery. We don't have the technology to do this stuff. And yet we have history and official Egyptologists hammering away at us, telling us that this was all done by a bunch of slaves and with copper tools and wood and stone. This is obviously quite absurd. And again, which is why we are starting from the point of view that life is full of meaning. The entire universe is meaningful. And everything that is an expression that can be felt or sensed or measured in any way from the physical upwards or from upwards down to the physical has meaning and consciousness. So we're talking about a universal phenomenon. And this, again, frees us, if we start from this point of view, it frees us from all limitation. Our mind can't deal with it for a start, because our mind can only compare. It can only say right and wrong, good and bad, light and dark, and it can only work between two polarities or two extremes, and anything that's in between, shades. So when we try and understand consciousness by thinking about it, it's impossible, because consciousness is beyond thinking. It's beyond thought, which means that the nature of the energy of the cosmos is itself beyond thought. Thought, mind are expressions of something else, something that is higher in origin, something that is more universal, something that is faster. That is why inside of us we have a series of faculties, which we will look at a little later on in this talk, which give us to understand that there is the state of consciousness that we have available to us in our current state of being, in our current civilizations on this planet, is drastically reduced to what it could be, or what it possibly has been, or most likely has been, in other civilizations and in other ages or eons in the history of this planet and solar system. So let's move on then to look at reality is far beyond that which our physical senses can perceive. Again, we're shortcutting because we don't have much time. If you want to go through this bit by bit, the whole psychological aspect, the philosophical aspect, the technical aspect, the scientific aspect, and all the tools of the great toolkit we need to use to work on ourselves. There are many tools and they're very important. And the good news is they're not very complicated, which is why they work. So this is just to invite us to see, whoops, I didn't learn that at school. That doesn't fit in with my biology classes. And these three diagrams actually show the same thing. The interesting one on the left is the sephirotic tree of the Hebraic ancient Jewish traditions. The sephirots, or the sephirim, the tree of life, is actually a picture of a human being, what a human being is inside, internally, or we could say esoterically. Esoteric just means what you can't see, or what's hidden, or occult. It's nothing weird about it. And then in the center, we see a kind of an interesting energy or depiction. It's a representation of energy fields and vortices and so on surrounding the inner anatomy in another dimension of ourselves. On the right, we see images we've frequently seen, and also previously in these lectures, of the Eastern traditions, the chakra and the energy centers. And in this image, we also see the presence of the elements of earth, air, fire, and water. And what is this inviting us to do? It's inviting us to understand that we mentioned in a previous lecture that we have an inverted understanding of life. We start from the wrong point. We start from the material end, the 3 dimensions, and then try to understand with 3-dimensional tools and a limited mind that from which we originated, which is in a far faster and higher vibrating frequency and dimension of creation. This is obviously an impossible task, which we have set ourselves, which is why, of course, science, as it stands, will always be utterly incapable of understanding the nature and meaning of life, because it doesn't have the apparatus, because it believes that we have to have physical apparatus to be able to understand non-physical phenomena. For example, we still not managed to invent a machine that can read human values. For example, we don't have a value meter. You can't connect someone to an electronic computer and it will read how generous they are. It will just measure their generosity. It will measure the amount of love they have, or it will measure the amount of selfishness they have, or it will measure the amount of anger they have, the amount of resentment they have, or the jealousy that they have. It doesn't measure anything that's important. We don't have a machine to do that. We have machines, interesting machines and discoveries that can, for example, take photographs of our aura and show us that, yes, there effectively is some kind of vital, subtle energy around us, or vital body, which changes colors and forms and expressions according to our moods and mentality and so on. These are not new. We also have radionics, which is interesting, which is, again, hard to understand with conventional physics. And yet you can heal at a distance with a drop of blood. You can do all kinds of fascinating things, or cure infections in animals, or, for example, pests in crops, using a small device with some dials on it. It's a very peculiar phenomenon that, of course, is not commercial, because it works, and it ruins a lot of industry. So this is just a taster of inviting us to see we are not single or 3-dimensional beings. We are pluridimensional. Quantum physicists enjoy themselves enormously and entertain us with the versions of how many dimensions exist in the cosmos. The latest version I heard was 11 dimensions, parallel dimensions. And then, for example, we are familiar nowadays with the term the multiverse. That is to say, not one universe, but the universe within the universe within the universe, parallel universes, multiple universes all at the same time. And then all kinds of other fanciful ideas, such as we could also have be coexisting in another dimension of a universe at the same time as we are here, and so on. Of course, all of these ideas mostly come through theorizing and fantasizing. So we can't really take them as a basis for serious work on ourselves. However, the great theosophists, the great esoteric investigators who have used meditation in depth and achieved a degree of self-knowledge of very high levels through history tell us that there are 7 dimensions in the cosmos. And the interesting thing is that as human beings, we are also septuple or sevenfold in our constitution. That means we have 7 bodies, effectively, parallel bodies. They are within each other, they are linked to each other, they connect to each other, and yet they don't interfere with each other. And each one corresponds to specific functions which maintain us alive and also connect us to the different dimensions as we go up. And the higher we go up in the dimensions, the more subtle the bodies are, the higher the frequency of vibration is, i.e. we can reach electronic frequencies in the causal plane. In the mental plane, we're talking about the vibration of molecular frequencies, atomic frequencies, and so on. So it's a world of energy. The universe is energy. Matter is the condensation of energy. And it's fascinating to see how matter itself, according to our understanding of chemistry and the periodic table, everything that has form is simply a recombination of the most simple element, which is a hydrogen atom. And the hydrogen atom is, of course, has 1 electron, 1 proton, and 1 neutron. So if you like, it has 3 components, interestingly enough. 3 is a very important number to take into account when we talk about creation. And all the great spiritual sciences, and in origin also the great religions, all teach the principle of three. We find it in the Hindu traditions, we find it in Egyptian traditions, we find it in the Christian traditions and the Hebraic traditions, and so on and so forth. And these three cosmic energies unfold, recombine, unfold, recombine, unfold, recombine, giving, as it were, expression in this enormous cosmic womb to forms, dimensions, universes, galaxies, suns, solar systems, planets, nature, and then, of course, evolution. And the whole point of this enormous cosmic adventure, which we're having a little look into now, is that we ourselves are traveling through time and space, not as a physical entity. The physical body is merely a temporal clothing which we adorn ourselves, or we are given it. And our consciousness is adorned with it in order to have experiences. It's really that simple. So the actual object of existing at all is, on the biological level, of course, to reproduce, keep the species alive, just like these are laws of nature. However, the cosmos itself is of a superior nature, and consciousness is beyond the laws of instinct and survival and reproduction of the physical world. And therefore, the awakening of consciousness is fundamental to understanding the nature of existence. If you don't awaken consciousness, then you never know what existence is. You just muddle through life. Maybe you reproduce yourself, maybe you don't. Maybe you have a good time, maybe you don't. And then you die. And that's it. It has no meaning to it. But consciousness gives meaning to everything because it gives comprehension to everything. And it means that we can fit into and reconnect with the same sources of energy which originated our consciousness and sent it traveling through time and space, through all the dimensions, and through the whole process of evolving through the atomic mineral kingdoms, the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, and eventually ends up finding itself in a human expression and having to learn all the way through this process consciously the meaning and the science behind the phenomenon, behind the mineral phenomenon, the vegetable phenomenon, the animal phenomenon, eventually to become effectively what we are as a human animal. After all, biologically speaking, that's what we are. Another species on the planet, we are animals. The difference is we have a dimension of consciousness and which enables us to do extraordinary things. And that is by design. It is not by chance. And the point is that what is it that we have to do with this? So if we move along now, let us contemplate the following. Basically, what we're saying is that a human being is an unrealized phenomenon. Unrealized means that we have not become truly real. It is, in a sense, we are the possibility of something, a project or a prototype of something. So what does that mean? It means if we work on ourselves and awaken our consciousness and awaken our inner faculties, then we will achieve the following. For example, we will achieve to develop our intuition, which is a faculty. Intuition is simply knowing things without knowing why or thinking about them. You just know them, and they are true. And that's, something that we have all experienced at one time or another. And it's a faculty that the more you develop it, then the more it happens. Clairvoyance, we all heard of clairvoyance, the third eye, and so on. That, of course, does exist. And we are all clairvoyant to a degree. True clairvoyance or objective clairvoyance is seeing absolutely the inside of the dimensions of nature as they are, without any subjective opinion or concept or memory, without any tainting, without any shades. It's seen as it is. So to achieve objective clairvoyance is, again, even for a clairvoyant, is a major process of change, because subjective clairvoyance is actually rather dangerous, because we see other people's falseness and think it's real, or tell them things about themselves which are actually not the case. So it's a fascinating and interesting phenomena to study, which we can't go into in this lecture. Telepathy, again, we're all telepathic. We all feel and receive messages of one kind or another from other people. The most obvious example is we're thinking about someone and they call us. Or we call someone and think, oh, I was just thinking of you. Why? Because if you think about someone, you send energy waves to that person through time and space. Very simple. And the power of ubiquity is, again, something that is pretty much unknown nowadays. It's the capacity of being, which only truly awakened conscious beings are capable of doing, is to be able to perceive phenomenon in different places at the same time. Clairaudience is to be able to hear what normally it doesn't perceive. So we could argue that, for example, the great composers, Beethoven, Mozart, and so on, they all were clairaudient in the sense that the inner faculty of clairaudience was awakened in them, and they were given to hear the music of the spheres, as it's called, which was beautifully portrayed by Disney, who himself was clairvoyant, and produced Fantasia, this extraordinary expression of the wonders of nature through music, image, and sound. Then polyvoyance, of course, again, is seeing everything at the same time. And premonition is another, being able to sense things that are going to happen. Again, most of these things, all of us have had and have now and again to some more or lesser degree. But none of them are truly developed or truly objective. And this is the problem that we have to face when we go on the journey of self-discovery and self-transformation. So then we have on the other side, we seek to master and command the elements of nature. What are we talking about? Earth, fire, air, water, ether. And we won't go into this now, but everything is composed of these elements, and without it, there is no life. And therefore, we are composed of these elements, and they work chaotically within inside of us, not because they are chaotic, but because we have become chaotic through the false personality that we have, the false image of ourselves that we have, the false way of thinking that we have, and the complete disconnection we have from our own selves, our own true center, our own being, the cosmos, nature, creation, and pretty much everything around us. So reorganizing ourselves and awakening and undergoing these processes allows us to also obtain information through dreams, to interpret our dreams and receive messages. To travel consciously in the astral body, again, this is something that many, many people around the world currently experience without any pretensions of spirituality or other. They are able to see their body asleep in bed and travel around the world in another dimension where you can float, fly, go through walls, and so on. Many of us have woken up in dreams and can also experience these phenomena, but in our own unconscious world of our own private dream. To travel in an astral body is something rather different because it's actually traveling in the astral plane of the entire world. Just like we would get on an airplane or get in a car or go for a walk in our physical body, people who have an astral body just leave the physical body and travel in what looks effectively like an identical parallel world, or it's the same world effectively, but it's being experienced in a higher vibration in the fifth dimension. Another faculty, of course, is if the inner powers are being realized and developed, then we obtain the ability to maneuver and manage our own energies, which means, of course, we can project energy, which means things like healing, curing, and combining the mind with the heart and focusing energy and so on and so forth. So, in other words, there is an unlimited possibility to self-growth and self-realization. So it is utterly absurd to dismiss all these things as mumbo-jumbo, woo-woo land, saying it's vague, unclear, subjective, it's fantasy, and so on. Well, that is really unreasonable and absurd. The only way to know whether these things are fake or not is by developing them. And if you do it, you get it, you develop it. So it's a question of hands-on. Let's go and experiment, not in the chemistry laboratory in the university, in the multinational. No, let's experiment in the greatest laboratory of all, which is ourselves. Our body is a fantastic, extraordinary vehicle with unrealized potential, unknown potential, and we are lucky enough to be in one and to be able to discover ourselves in it and what it's for, what it's made of, and what can we do with it. So it's a very exciting adventure. We look here ancient Greece, for example, going back a bit, how do we come to understand a little bit about consciousness and the difference between intellect, for example, and conscious learning or objective learning? And if we look at this chart or this diagram, we will see on the left-hand side, everything that has to do with what was called in those days or epistemology, which is a long word. We find everything to do with intellectuality. That is the use of the mind, memory, intellect. That is to say, the obtention of information through reading, instruction, classes, and experimentation outside with theories, hypotheses, etc. And we achieve through that understanding, so a conceptual understanding or an intellectual understanding, and through which we create, as it were, a map of inherited understanding or concept of the world we live in. So, and this information, most of it comes from outside of ourselves. It's an exterior process of relating through the mind and through the senses to the exterior world of nature, and therefore trying to understand and interpret it. And it's subjective in essence, which means that it's not actually real. It's not directly so, for the following reasons. When we look on the other side, we will see there is a large difference between this form of obtaining knowledge, which is Western civilization, is a typical example. Our entire society is based on this process of inherited hypothesis, theory, and concept, which we modify along the way. And our version of the world changes in the measure in which we invent new theories and discover new aspects of how somebody else has done things, i.e. how nature does things. So, and then we try and put labels on them, and what we don't know, we just say, well, it is like this, and it will be currently and shortly discovered the reason for it. And I was fascinated recently to see, for example, which is a typical example of the arrogance and hallucination of the mentality of the Big Bang, for example. Someone, one of the great exponents of this, was saying, and when he was asked, well, have you actually proven the Big Bang? Can you measure it? Has anyone, is there a photograph of it? Does anyone know anything about this really? And he said, no, we're working on that. Mathematicians all around the world are working on it, and we will soon come to the answer. So what he was actually saying was, if he turned that round, was saying, we haven't got the faintest idea. And we're carrying on theorizing about it until one day we find some theory that seems to fit and some mathematical equation that will seem to somehow fit us. And then we'll say, we know it, we've done it. We understand the nature of the cosmos. We've got it. Anything else is meaningless. It's the most reductive, absurd form of living and investigation that could possibly exist. And it's very powerful because our minds are connected to it through our social programming, education, and culture. On the right-hand side, let's look at this little list. Instead of an intellectual process of understanding the meaning of life and consciousness, we're talking about an intuitive process. And as we said earlier, intuition doesn't use physical tools. You don't use microscopes, you don't use mathematics, you don't use anything. It's a faculty. And we come with it, and we can develop it. We have the potential for developing it. Therefore, if you develop it, then you have human tools for understanding the nature of humanness and creation. And this is effectively not an intellectual process. It's a conscious process. It's to do with awakening and developing consciousness, which again can't be measured. There is no machine to measure consciousness. It's not even known what it is. You can't measure intuition either. There is no machine for it. You can't actually measure intellect either. You can only measure electrical frequencies in the brain and activity. So what is consciousness and intuition? What does it lead to? Instead of leading to having a bunch of books and literature and inherited information and concepts and theories, which change through time, you get this through direct personal experience. You don't get it from books. You get it because you enter into a world of direct perception experience of what is really there. And what does that lead to? It leads to something called comprehension, which is different from understanding. Understanding is whether you follow the logic and understand the parameters and understand all the components and have an argument for it and understand the basis, the hypothesis behind it, and then you follow it all through and you reach an understanding of how it works. So you can understand a machine because you can follow the whole process through which it was built. And of course, that's a valid thing, but it's got nothing to do with understanding the meaning of things. Whereas comprehension is actually understanding the meaning of what's going on, the meaning of what it is to have anger, what it is to have love, what it is to experience feeling emotion, what it is to connect to a plant, what it is to connect to the stars, what it is to connect to other people, and so on. So comprehension of life uses life tools, and life tools are based on consciousness. And the interesting thing about this, again, it's pretty much opposite to the traditional fashion, because it's interior. All of this is to do with going inside yourself, which is why the classes on meditation are so fundamental, because without meditation, you can't achieve these things. Without inner silence, without entering into an inner dimension and space inside of ourselves and awakening and tuning into these subtle high-frequency vibrations inside of us, we can't achieve knowledge or comprehension of things. And again, the difference here is that the knowledge obtained through inner investigation is objective. It's not fantasy. It's actually objective. Fantasy does exist, and in the process we will encounter our own fantasies and visions and all kinds of things which are subjective. Our psyche is full of subjective elements, which is something we'll talk about shortly. But nevertheless, if we awaken consciousness, then our understanding becomes objective, and we are able to know the difference between what is false and what is not, what is fantasy and what is not. And we call that gnosis, or gnosis, which means, it's a Greek word, which means knowledge. Knowledge of life, knowledge of things, knowledge of creation. So that, again, is is an introduction to understand how our society, being entirely based on the left-hand side, is doomed to existential failure, because it rejects the right-hand side and doesn't create any kind of balance between the two. So actually, if development of consciousness was then combined with the traditional way of doing things, what we would have is enlightenment, which is effectively what the great founders of what we know of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment actually did. All these great investigators, Galileo and Isaac Newton and so on, these guys were very, very highly devoted to their own spirituality, and they were developing all the right-hand side. And through the development of the right-hand side, they were then able to present a pattern and an explanation of things, an experiment in the physical world using the left-hand side. What's interesting about that is that through time, their students and their disciples didn't understand what their teachers were doing with this peculiar esoteric knowledge that they were messing around with. They had no idea what they were doing, and they weren't up to this. So what they did was say, well, let's just leave all that rubbish on the side and let's stick with the hard facts. And that's the way, fortunately, our society is governed. It's the way our educational system is governed, and therefore it's the way human beings are being mass-produced to become more materialistic and more superficial, at the mercy of social media and so on and so forth. We're all familiar with this catastrophic situation. So in that sense, there is no solution for everyone in mass. There is only a solution for those individuals who are concerned enough, interested enough, brave enough to dive into the unknown of themselves and brave all the terrible monsters and creatures we will find there, and also to discover all the most amazing, beautiful, sublime discoveries that we will also find there, which is, of course, the nature of mythology. All mythology in all cultures, Jason and the Argonauts, Hercules and the Pillars and all this, all of these ancient mysteries, the Iliad, the Odyssey, all of them are allegorical versions of the voyage inside of ourselves and everything we're going to encounter there. All you have to do is understand the language behind all of this, the knowledge behind all of this, and we are then able to interpret these myths, and they become meaningful to us. They're not just exciting stories nowadays not to read, to see on a film. They are actually something meaningful that we can interpret and apply to ourselves, because we ourselves are going on a voyage of discovery in uncharted territory. And in that uncharted territory, we're going to find many, many frightening things, and we're going to find many, many allies to help us through the trip. So to reach a conclusion and on this subject, which is really a taster for doing a proper course on all these things, we need a toolkit for self-discovery and transformation. You do not undergo transformation just because you feel like it, or because it sounds cool, or because you really need to. You cannot undergo any kind of serious internal transformation without tools. And tools implies a toolkit, and a toolkit implies learning how to use the tools. What sort of toolkit are we talking about for self-discovery? The voyage, the great adventure, the great work of transforming ourselves, which has always existed ever since there have been human beings, and human beings unfolded as well from the higher dimensions into this learning process. Well, we need tools like self-observation. Self-observation is probably one of the most powerful tools any human being can use. It's the developing the faculty, it's a faculty, like the other ones we saw in previous slides, for looking into oneself and studying what is going on in every level, in the mind, in the emotions, in our sexuality, in our instincts, our impulses, and being able to develop the ability to see all these phenomena and not just become a subconscious expression of them, just like a machine reacting from an unknown source inside. So this is something we need to learn how to do, separate ourselves from ourselves and become the observer of ourselves. We need to train ourselves, it's a training process, which is again a discipline, to live in the present. Most of us live in a fantasy of what we're going to do tomorrow, or what we have to do tomorrow, or what we want to become, or what we're going to do one day when we finally have the money and are successful, and no longer in student debt or whatever it is that we are suffering from. We're remembering what happened yesterday and the days before, or the weeks or years before. We don't actually spend very much time at all in the moment, which is actually the only reality that does exist. It's a bit of a shame, because the only way to be happy is to live in the moment and feel the gloriousness of a beautiful morning, a beautiful afternoon, to enjoy seeing the clouds, to enjoy seeing other creatures, birds, animals, to hear the sounds of nature, to enjoy other people, to learn from other people, to enjoy the nature of working. All of these things are about living intensely in the present and learning from the present, whilst we discover all the other things that are going on in our journey inside. Meditation, we've talked about that in the last 3 classes. Obviously, it's a powerful and fundamental tool for any kind of self-knowledge and transformation. And then we come to this 4th point, there are many others, but we'll stick with this 4th point here, is the comprehension and elimination of our defects. And what do we mean by that? Well, consciousness can be positively channeled, and it becomes positive conscious action, or spontaneous positive action. But then consciousness negatively channeled becomes what we call defects or negative values. In religion, they call it sins, bad habits, whatever. It's negative, it's energy or consciousness channeled negatively. So I'd like to go back to the beginning in order to come to the conclusion, which is to take on board the idea, the exciting idea, that actually there is something inside of all of us that is on a journey that's taken a very, very, very long time. I won't put numbers on it, but it's much older than this planet, the solar system, and so on, traveling through time and space from an origin in a very high dimension where there is no matter and there is no substance, and everything is somehow one. And from there, this, if you like, spark or essence, we call it, emanated and began a journey. And it descended through the different dimensions without knowledge of itself, without a true identity, but with the possibility of growing, experiencing, and learning. And this essence goes through this rather long-lasting school, if you like. It's called evolution, but evolution in the spiritual or the Gnostic sense is understanding that an essence goes through a learning process in the mineral kingdom and is conscious of its process in every form of mineral or substance that exists, and what we know here on this planet as the periodic table, any element and all its possibilities is actually a conscious learning process of an essence. And the same essence, once it's learned, gone through a particular trajectory through the mineral kingdom, it enters into, when it's graduated, if you like, and become conscious of the science behind the physical aspect of things like carbon, diamonds, gold, silver, metals, and so on, stones, granite, all these things. It then graduates and begins a new learning process in a higher level where it has more freedom and more possibilities, called the vegetable kingdom. And it goes through, again, millions of years of learning processes through different groups of species and plants, learning to become the science of each one and becoming ever more knowledgeable of nature and creation. And eventually ends up in human form. Once it's graduated from the vegetable form, of course, comes into the animal kingdom, goes again through the same process, learning, eventually it becomes a highly evolved animal, such as a dolphin, a horse, an eagle, a dove. And once it's, as it were, mastered all the knowledge in the line of evolution through which it's gone through in the animal kingdom, it then graduates again. It then has this extraordinary opportunity of obtaining human form. And what you have is free consciousness in a human expression in an animal body. And then there's this great adventure of what happened afterwards. And that's a long story, but what's interesting is that everyone who's alive today, according to this knowledge, has already gone through a long process of coming and going in human form and making a great many mistakes. And the result of all of these mistakes, which are related to the laws of cause and effect, in the East they call it karma, dharma, and so on, the more you channel consciousness and make mistakes, which means doing things the wrong way around, then the more complex people become, the more complex we become. And our consciousness eventually is lost inside all of the defects we have, the ego we have, the personality we have, and is effectively negative consciousness. And then we become fractioned, which is why we have so many thinkers in our heads, because every thinker we have in our head is fractioned consciousness. We call them ego, or the whole collection of them is called ego, the ego. And the ego is made up of psychological aggregates, which are the encapsulation of pure consciousness, but in negative thought, feeling, and action. And I will leave that as an enticement for all of you, not to refute it, argue with it, or confirm it, or say, yes, that's the case, because obviously all I've done is mention the possibility of things, concept of things. But I would certainly invite you to, those of you interested in this subject, of going deeper into the toolkit. How have we come to where we are now? There is a reason for this. The reason that we're living on our planet in this day and age, the reason that there is so much destruction, so much selfishness, so much materialism, and it doesn't look like it's getting a lot better, is there is a reason for all these things. There is a reason for why we are as we are. There's a reason why we're born where we are. There's a reason why we have the personality we have. There is a reason why we have the virtues and the defects we have. There is a reason for an explanation for all of these things. So again, the premise for the adventure of self-knowledge is, yes, there are answers to everything, but the answers are not intellectual. The answers have to be discovered, which means that effectively the greatest mystery of all is you. You are the great mystery. And everything is there for you to discover inside of you, not inside somebody else, inside of you. And only you can discover it. Nobody else can discover it for you. Which effectively means that to awaken consciousness means taking absolute responsibility for everything that happens to us, not blaming other people for it. You can't blame your partner, you can't blame your parents, you can't blame the government, you can't blame your town mayor, you can't blame the prime minister, the president, or whatever it is you happen to be living. You have to take responsibility for everything that happens to you happens for a reason, and in some way or other you have brought it upon yourself. And what that means is, according to how you take it, well, that's a bit of a downer because somehow there's a conspiracy against me because I'm not having a good time. Or it becomes the greatest challenge that any human being could ever face, that you are now in a position to assume your responsibility, and which means you can now begin understanding how you got to where you are and doing something about it. Because everything that happens to us, every single event, whether it's significant, whether it's happy, whether it's sad, whether it's difficult, whether it's painful, is an invitation to learn, to awaken, and to grow and to move forwards. But on the journey of moving forward, you cannot afford to sit there feeling sorry for yourself and blaming other people. It doesn't work. It's a bad deal, because the feeling sorry for oneself is a form of self-love, actually. Oh, poor me. It's a very negative energy. And these are the kind of things we study when we study Gnostic courses. That's what we go through. We go through a systematic course which explains to us step by step how our personality is created in each coming and going. What is the ego? What is the essence? What is the consciousness? What can we do about it? What are the tools we can use? Psychologically speaking, emotionally speaking, physically speaking, sexually speaking, in every sense, in order to be able to free consciousness and free ourselves from our current predicament of just reacting to everything all of the time without knowing why, and going through life without knowing why, and coming to the end of it without knowing why, or where we're going for that matter. So thank you all very much indeed for joining us today. I hope this has been stimulating for you. None of this has anything to do with that you should be saying, yes, he's right and that's the way it is. Not at all. That wouldn't produce any kind of interesting result. It's an invitation, merely an invitation to everyone who's listening, and invite all of your friends, people who have affinities in these areas, to find more tools to carry on the journey to self-discovery, to carry on this adventure, to become the adventurer in our own mystery world, in our own voyage of self-discovery, and to assume the responsibility for it, and to be brave enough to do it. Because the voyage of self-discovery, just as we're going to find angelical, beautiful things, we're also going to find our own demons. We're going to find all those nasty things hiding around the corner that make us think nasty things, and sometimes do unpleasant things. And all these aspects, we have to make them conscious. We have to make our unconscious conscious. And that is the only way we can awaken consciousness. So we wish you all the best for your personal journey, and all success in whatever areas of life you're working, from whatever country you come from, whatever culture you come from, and invite you on this universal adventure of self-discovery. And we'll hand you over now to our technicians, and thanking again also all this team of people around the world who have been supporting this wonderful project of sharing with humanity the possibility of awakening and the possibility of enlightenment and the empowerment of taking back again what is truly ours. So hope to meet some of you one day along the path. You never know. And good luck with it all, and have a very good morning, afternoon, or evening.